We've spoken briefly about resources before. Let's take a closer look on how they work. We click on the Resources tab. This displays for me all the resources that are within the scope of my current selection. Right now, since I don't have anything selected, the only resources that I have accessible are those defined in the application or in the window itself. If I select something on the artboard, say the rectangle, now its scope is also displayed, so I can see the resources defined on it or any of its parents. I'm going to switch back to the Properties Inspector, and I'm going to change my rectangle to use a linear gradient. I've used the mouse wheel to scroll up through the properties. I'm selecting the Fill property, and I'm changing it to a linear gradient. I'm going to create a red color for one of my gradient stops, but I'm going to define that as a resource. When I click the button to convert it to a resource, the Color Resource dialog is brought up. Every resource must have a name. In this case, I'm just going to call it red. Resource names don't necessarily have to be unique, but they have to be unique at each scope. This means if I have a red defined on my document, I can't have another resource named red on the same document. I could, however, have that resource defined in an application, and then, if I were using the resource, the element would look to its parent and continuing up the tree until it found an element it was looking for. I'm going to define this resource on this document, the window. I could click this button to define the resource in my application, or I could click this button to create a new resource dictionary. A resource dictionary is a separate file where I can keep my resources together and distribute them to my teammates. For now, I'm just going to create it in the resource and hit OK. The brush inspector is now still showing me that I'm working with a linear brush here, but it's showing that my color is now set to a color resource, or my red. The marker has also changed to green, as green indicates a resource is currently in use. I can now select one of my other rectangles, including a rectangle with a solid fill, switch to the Color Resources tab, and select that red. In this case, even though the red was used in a linear gradient in one rectangle, I can use that color to set the entire fill. I'm going to go back to the large rectangle, and this time I'm going to convert the entire brush to a resource. I'm going to name it Black to Red, as that describes how the gradient looks, and press OK. Now, the entire brush editor has been replaced, and it's showing that I'm using a local brush resource, Black to Red in this case. If I choose one of my other rectangles, and now switch to the Brush Resource tab, I can click Black to Red, and the entire gradient is displayed. I'm going to use the Selection tool to move that out from behind the image so you can see it a little more easily. Now, since the gradient uses a red that we've established as a resource, I can modify that and it gets updated in all the places that it's used. I've switched to my Resource tab, and on my window, we see both the red and the Black to Red. The red is a color resource, and when I click on this chevron, I can modify that color. The smaller rectangle here changes to the new color immediately, and the gradient stop in my two brushes changes as well, since those are all linked to my resource. Now those property markers that we looked at earlier, I'm going to switch to my properties, and I'm going to use the property marker to convert this to a local value. When I do this, the connection to the resource is severed, so now when I go to the Resources tab and change that red again, you'll notice that the rectangle that I severed the connection doesn't change even as I modify the color. You can define a resource from practically any property type. In this case, we've used colors and we've used brushes, but you can also use control templates, you can use doubles or enumerations, setting them all as resources and using them throughout your document. Resources can also be assigned directly from the resource palette. Let's say I wish to assign this Black to Red to that rectangle that's solid. I can click on the resource and drag it directly to the rectangle, and when I release, it asks me which property I want to apply to. In this case, if I say apply it to the fill, the rectangle accepts the Black to Red resource. If I switch back to the Properties tab, you'll see that the fill for that object now has the green property marker to indicate that it's using the resource that I just assigned to it. We've completed our tour now of the Expression Blend application, but we've really only scratched the surface of what Blend is capable of. As we continue with the lessons, we'll work more in depth into these features to unlock the capabilities of Blend.